subject to other police actions. Other police actions may include the use of chemical agents or less lethal munitions, which could cause risk of injury to those who remain.
Stressful.
They got journalists, they got legal observers, they got medics.
They want us to comply, to live in fear.
There is going to be backlash, there is going to be propaganda against you. They have a playbook.
This could be anybody, that we're really being targeted for open public organizing.
I'm here supporting the RNC 8.
Thank you. Oh, we know Susan. Over there. Hey, you can be a lawyer all you want. That's fine.
You need to take the freedom that you need and want, as opposed to just accepting what they're going to hand to you.
None of the police who brutalized anybody has been investigated.
I want to be smart about the benefits that I get out of doing things versus their cost.
We need to make sure that people who participate in the kinds of things that expose them to the wrath of the government know that the people stand behind them.
Police got $50 million in federal funds to buy weapons.
The way that they conduct business has been born out of hundreds of years of development of the police state in the United States.
The FBI and the Ramsey County Sheriffs had been compiling dossiers on people and investigating them based on their political opinions.
The police continued to fire projectiles into the crowd as it was walking away.
It was Kafkaesque. I mean, people have to resist. You can't just demonstrate against stuff. You need to resist.
The arrest of 6 other protesters. The protesters you see here are members of the group called the RNC Welcoming Committee.
A series of raids happened yesterday and today. 2 of the raids happened in St. Paul, 627 Smith Avenue last night, and 951 Eigelhart this afternoon. Earlier today, there were 3 raids in Minneapolis, 2301 23rd Avenue South, 3500 Harriet Avenue South, and 3240 17th Avenue South.
Most of the work that we were doing was logistical work a lot. As the local people, we were it fell to us to make sure that when people came to town, they had housing, that they were being fed, that they could get around the city safely. That was, 90% of the work we did. The other 10% would be the work we did along with groups like the Anti-War Committee, just raising local awareness about the RNC, trying to create cross sort of pollination, I guess, with other groups, working under the St. Paul principles, which were really historic in their usage, and trying to sort of put a face on anarchist politics.
We're really being targeted for open public organizing. There are a lot of people that engage in that sort of activity, and every time that there's a political prosecution and that they succeed with that, it lays the groundwork to continue that and broaden the target. So we were definitely targeted, not just in the days before the convention, but for a year and a half prior. In fact, while we were organizing, we were the targets of pretty intensive surveillance. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, but primarily because we identify as anarchists, and right now in this country, and this is something that has been true in the past as well, we're at a moment where anarchism is considered to be inherently criminal. I guess that it's just really threatening to the county, to the state, to the whole, to the federal government, to everybody, to think of anarchists really working together, and particularly in St. Paul, to think of anarchists working across ideological lines with other people, which happened at the RNC and hasn't really happened a whole lot very successfully at other recent mass mobilizations. They're really afraid of that sort of solidarity in building resistance.
The maximum penalty that we would face if convicted on both counts and serving time consecutively would be 5 years and a $10,000 fine each.
Just keeping in perspective that if something like this comes to your town, or you're going to be organizing against some sort of big thing, that there is going to be backlash, there is going to be propaganda against you. Mm-hmm. They have a playbook that they've used.
Ultimately, the issue is that they're criminalizing association. The same sort of association and networking that's really a lifeline in movements and in any sort of community, political or otherwise. So, maybe people committed crimes at the RNC, maybe they didn't. Maybe there were a million different conspiracies, or maybe there were none, but what they're invoking in court to get people convicted is this idea that the very fact of people either having known each other, having met each other at the RNC, having, possessed a widely distributed newspaper that the welcoming committee printed or anything like that, they're invoking those particularities and suggesting that the crime arises from them. And those sorts of connections are absolutely necessary to any sort of organizing. And so if you criminalize that sort of association, you make it impossible for movements to grow and to attract new people and to accomplish anything, I think. What our case demonstrates is actually the truth behind all of this, which is that the purpose of the court system and the purpose of prosecutors is not actually to bring things to trial. The job of the prosecutor is to get people to take plea agreements rather than go to trial.
They can drop charges on you for anything, and then it's up to you to prove your innocence. And that takes, that ties up your time, it ties up your resources, it ties up your money, it ties up your focus. To me, that's the most frustrating part of all this, is that the little, the time that I have for political work, most of it is ends up working on this, and so I can't really be doing other kinds of things. And so in that way, this has been a very effective way of squashing our ability to engage in the work that we want to engage in.
It's mind-blowing, and I think that hopefully our case and how tedious and torturous it is can be for some people a glimpse into how torturous and offensive the judicial system is. The 8 of us are all still presumed innocent, but our entire lives are wrapped around this thing, and we have it easy compared to what happens to a lot of people in this country that are railroaded through the judicial system.
The dropping of the terrorism enhancements specifically was definitely a victory for grassroots pressure campaigns, and our lawyers even pointed out that it had nothing to do with what they had done in court, because we've actually barely been in court up until this point, so it wasn't a victory achieved through litigation. It was definitely something that came from mobilizing all sorts of different people and communicating to Susan Gartner's office that this is not something that the people of the Twin Cities want to see happen.
We're not just supported by anarchists, we're not just supported by necessarily most of our supporters are progressive and on the left, but we're not, we haven't gotten isolated into this anarchist ghetto where our supporters are very, very few. Now that we're not being charged under this Minnesota Patriot Act, that's great, but it's still there, it still exists. Now the next people that decide to organize a demonstration and get busted for conspiracy to riot and furtherance of terrorism are going to face the Patriot Act, and we don't want to see that happening. So that's really important for supporters to kind of keep on this next legislative session in the fall to get that back on the agenda. it's this really complex sort of game of chess that we're playing and trying to figure out what they're going to do, and they're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And I really think they thought, okay, drop these other charges and we'll take some plea deals and we'll get our convictions. And I think all that really did was embolden us and our supporters to say, like, this is way messed up, and now we're not going to stop. Around our case, Susan Gartner, who we talked about this for over almost a year now, but she's running for governor. And so we have a really great something to pressure her on. She's not just, a lame duck county attorney. She's not going to leave here and finish. She's got a political career. And so we, our support committee, defense committee, has been doing this pressure campaign. Several weeks ago, Susan went to Chicago to get an ABA award, and some supporters out there greeted her.
Hi, my name is Mike Derschmid. I'm here supporting the RNC 8 defendants from the Republican National Convention charges that were filed against them for organizing a protest against the Republican National Convention in St. Paul last summer. What happened up there is days before the event started, in fact the day before, there was all these preemptive raids. Preemptive raids are, the police busting down doors or going after the organizers of the event. These organizers weren't even at the protests that they're complaining about. They're just arrested for organizing it. A legal point called prior restraint comes to mind in my mind here. What we're doing here is basically bird dogging Susan Gartner. She's showing up here in Chicago at the American Bar Association Criminal Justice Section Award Night, and that's here at the John Marshall Law School. And we are basically reminding her colleagues, her peers, about what's wrong with filing charges against political dissenters just for organizing people to get into the streets and protest. Susan Gartner, running for Democratic position for governor up there, is using this as political capital. Well, it's turning into a political liability for her. More and more people are learning of what she's done and what she refuses to. She refuses to drop the charges at this point. So what we're trying to do is get her to rethink her position.
I'm a member of the State Bar of Wisconsin in the National Lawyers Guild, and I also am the director of the Liberty Tree Foundation, which is a pro-democracy group that supports people exercising their constitutional rights as we are doing here today.
She must have made it past us, went in the back door, because we didn't see her. But we talked to a lot of her colleagues about informed debate and questions about what it is she's doing.
The mission of CRAS is to support the RNC arrestees through the legal process, and Court Watch goes to court with them, keeps track of what's happening to them, and gives them support in any area that they need. The RNC 8 are local people who set up a community center so that groups from all over the United States could come and get together and plan things together, have a place to stay or find a place to stay, be able to get food. They provided bicycles so people could get around town. It was a meeting space. They are being charged with conspiracy to riot. They were originally charged with terrorism, but those charges have been dropped. The county is trying to make them responsible for every bad thing that happened in St. Paul on September 1st, and has moved to amend the complaint so that it actually covers September 1st, even though they were all in jail at the time. Every single one of them was in jail and not able to be out on the streets doing anything, but they're going to be blamed for everything that happened. There are a number of cases where people were badly beaten by the police. There's a guy who was tased several times, and because he went into epileptic fits, he couldn't stop moving, so they kept tasing him to make him stop moving, and that didn't improve the situation any. There's a juvenile who was badly beaten by the police. He was taken to Ramsey County, and when they found out he was a juvenile, they took him over to juvenile detention, but juvenile detention refused to receive him because of his injuries and told the police to take him to Regent's Hospital. But the police didn't want to take him to Regent's Hospital because they didn't want to admit that they had beaten him up. None of the police who brutalized anybody has been investigated, to my knowledge. Other cities have been stuck with big legal bills because of the mass arrests, and John Choi wanted to make sure that St. Paul wasn't stuck with that kind of legal bill, so he talked to the city and had them talk to the people who hosted the RNC, set it up, and said, before you're allowed to set up in St. Paul, you must provide yourself with insurance that will cover any police brutality suits that are brought against the city. So they got a $10 million legal insurance policy, and the city won't be liable for very much, they figure. Bob Fletcher just decided he was going to close down St. Paul. And from one end of Kellogg to the other, the mobile field force unit went down Kellogg and started sweeping up groups, everybody in front of them. They moved very slowly. They put out tear gas and flashbangs and things to get the crowd moving, and they just swept everybody in their path. The entire group of people who was in St. Paul after 4 o'clock, whether they were picnickers or concert goers, they even got one of the RNC delegates in that sweep. They got journalists, they got legal observers, they got medics. They just lost control of the situation, and they decided everybody had to leave St. Paul. There'd be nobody left on the streets, and they rolled them all up and did mass arrests. You wind up with 4 charges. One guy had 9 or 10 charges on him. And your lawyer will look at this and say, you have 10 charges against you. If this goes to trial, the jury is almost sure to find you guilty on at least one of them. Take the plea deal. Plead to just one, and you're out of here. If you go to trial with 10 charges, you're probably not going to be any better off anyway. So the ability of the prosecutor to pile charges on somebody and then offer them a plea deal as a way out is being really sadly abused. But most of these people, it's their first time through the legal system, and they know nothing about it, whatever. It's their very first shot at being arrested or being in court. The National Lawyers Guild does pro bono work for defendants who have been put in jail, and if you really want to fight your case and go to trial, that's who you get. So there are people who are willing to fight for people who don't have enough money to pay them what they're actually worth. We found that the prosecutor is selectively prosecuting people who are from out of town because the expense and difficulty of traveling back and forth to make several court dates to fight their cases makes them more likely to be squeezed for a plea deal than somebody who lived in town. It has two purposes. One is to force the defendant to make a plea deal from exhaustion or poverty. That increases the prosecution's wins and makes it look more like the city is on top of its game and that the police were justified in arresting all these people. The reason you wouldn't want to prosecute people in town is not only they can put up a better fight, but they might be the people who are voting for the mayor or the governor or the people who have the power to appoint county prosecutors or city prosecutors and so on. So you don't want to annoy the mayor's constituents. There was a group called the Glass Bead Collective that was specifically targeted and had their stuff stolen. Most independent journalists were not targeted so much as they were just swept up and not taken very seriously. Many people had their equipment smashed on the ground as soon as the police arrested them. The first thing they do is take your camera and smash it on the ground like that.
The goal of the watcher is to put those individual officers under the microscope, so to speak. I think in general it's a good policy when something like this happens to pursue all legal remedies because it makes life extremely uncomfortable for the people who perpetrate these kinds of acts. We think this happened on order from somebody. We want to find out who it was really. We have our suspicions about who it was. They kept saying Department of Homeland Security over and over again as they were detaining us. So the impression we got from their arresting officers at the time was that they were operating on the orders for the Department of Homeland Security. In these kinds of situations, a centralized reporting network where you have like a big team where everybody's staying in the same place and you have some kind of leaders and so on becomes extremely vulnerable to attack. Like we remain completely functional, partially because we were completely decentralized. We have no leaders. You have to be able to film, edit, and get stuff out by yourself just as soon as you find a Wi-Fi connection. A lot of these protests that happen, be it the RNC protest or protests during the Republican Convention, stuff coming up in G20, these are protests about the policies that the state is undertaking. It's real issues that people are demanding real solutions for. And the pattern that we're seeing is very, very problematic. Is that it comes down to that there's usually some kind of violence by police or the authorities against the protesters, and that becomes a story. And that needs to be covered. But what they're doing in a sense is they're shifting the attention from the real issues to another issue, which is also very important, but it's almost like a satellite issue to the fundamental one, and that is the violence. So it's something people need to think about when they're going out to film this stuff, to cover this stuff. In that, and not that we need to cover less of the violence, so but we'll have to find a way to let the issues still be heard. Surrounded by all these stories that protest violations of political rights. It's almost like the whole point of people coming to protest in the first place gets lost among all the tear gas.
First, I was charged with felony probable cause rioting, which was then dropped to unlawful assembly, which then was changed to presence at an unlawful assembly, and giving false information to an officer, which was then changed to, right before the trial, unlawful assembly, refusal to disperse from an unlawful assembly, parading without a permit, fleeing an officer on foot, and giving false information to an officer. The cops were lying. The prosecutor was clearly trying to connect us to these things, like the welcoming committee and whatever, in order to prove that we were, or I guess specifically that I had this intent of breaking the law from the start when I went into the streets. I just started to feel like I was basing my life around this thing that seemed really extremely arbitrary, and that I could just pay a ticket and be finished with it, and kind of balancing sacrifices with payoff, I guess. I wanted to push back somehow, and that was a way that I could see doing it, was through going to trial and wasting the state's money and making them prove their case, I guess. I had a really hard time keeping a straight face in court. It was just like extremely absurd and like, I don't know. I went to trial in March and with one other person, and we were both acquitted of all the charges. It would be sort of ridiculous to not acknowledge that by going to an RNC or whatever, that you're participating in a spectacle simply because of the amount of media and the way that things will almost certainly be framed afterwards, which I don't think negates. I think lots of things that are really awesome happen and get trivialized by the media, but that the media isn't necessarily where things happen. And it just kind of becomes this question of like, who exactly are you battling? Like, are you battling the police? Are you battling the Republican Party? Are you battling lethargy in general, like societal lethargy? And like, what do you want, kind of? So I don't necessarily think that going to summits in and of itself is stupid. I think that it's really easy to get arrested and get burnt out because of that. I want to be smart about the benefits that I get out of doing things versus their cost. Just because you believe in self-defense doesn't mean you need to always be going and meeting the enemy on their own terms and like sacrificing yourself. And that's something that I thought like instantly about the RNC kind of, and post RNC. Yeah, it's tricky because sometimes it does really feel like the police are everywhere and they have an all-seeing eye, and like that it really is actually something that you legitimately need to be worried about, and that there's no way that you can get away with anything. It was a crisis time, and so the things that you expect to be normal are different. I felt like I was in a different mindset than I would be were I to receive news of like one person getting arrested and charged with conspiracy that I knew, versus all of a sudden all these things happening and raids and police everywhere. I was surprised for sure by what happened. I feel like I was around people who were paranoid, and I was around people who knew how to stay calm amidst all this stuff, especially working with medic folk. I just feel really fortunate that I was around some of the people that I was. I don't think that my life has returned to normal necessarily, because the atmosphere that I'm surrounded by, the effects of the RNC are really well woven into my life as people that I love a lot. Their lives have been pretty seriously interrupted by the RNC and the charges that they're facing from it.
The motivations for Cold Snap forming were specific, but also general. Like the specific ones were knowing that the RNC was coming to the Twin Cities, knowing that people would be organizing resistance to the RNC in a variety of different forms, knowing that those people were going to be subject to a tremendous amount of harassment and persecution, like from the police. And also knowing that legal support would be entirely crucial, like to successful resistance to what the RNC stands for, what the Republicans stand for, what the American government stands for. General motivations were a history of like hundreds of years of state repression, police brutality, state actions to prevent people from understanding and exercising their rights, to scare them into staying at home. You know, and since like the television age has come, like scaring them into staying in their homes and watching TV, and like thinking about like what kind of vote they're going to cast come November, as opposed to actually being out there and actually taking action to create the world that we want to have, as opposed to waiting for the politicians to give it to us whenever they get around to it. The preemptive raids, like in the weekend prior to the RNC, were extremely targeted. They were targeted at people at the Convergence Center that was run and like organized by the RNC Welcoming Committee. And in that particular raid, they went in and they detained everybody who was in there. There was almost 100 people they strip searched several people in the kitchen, and they made everybody like lay down and held had guns drawn to keep control of the situation, and including a small child who was 5 years old at the time. And that was like one way that the police tried to prevent organizing, tried to scare people away from any kind of social connections with each other, any kind of space in which they could share meals and talk with each other and have trainings on knowing their rights and that sort of thing. The state doesn't want us to know these things. They don't want us to know what our rights are, how to exercise them, how not to give the state information and give the police information that can be used against us. They don't want us to know these things. They want us to comply, to live in fear. And so when we subvert that by educating ourselves, educating our communities, then we're able to mount a resistance, and we can create a culture of resistance so that they can't as easily repress us. They can't as easily have their way and dictate how we're going to live our lives. People should not be surprised by the level of police repression that you see at large events like this. Should not be surprised by what happens to you on the streets. Should not be surprised to see the thousands of police in riot gear with guns and flashbang grenades and rubber bullets and pepper spray and tasers. You shouldn't be surprised by that at all, because these strategies and these things that you see, the way that the police organize themselves, the way that they conduct business, has been born out of hundreds of years of development of the police state in the United States. They use the tremendous amount of money that they had to stock up for weaponry and police provisions for the RNC, a way that they can use their toys and feel good about the amount of equipment they can carry around to scare people and to show that they're powerful and that they have the ability to do whatever they want. With informants involved in the RNC organizing prior to the RNC, there are a lot of well-documented cases of informants. People have come out through the course of legal cases. We also had a lot of paid officers who are on the payroll, as opposed to Andrew Darce, who was a paid informant. We had officers who infiltrated groups such as the RNC Welcoming Committee, and those officers would get involved to various extents. A lot of them would engage provocatorish actions, and whereas others would focus on data collection, surveillance, and that sort of thing. Informants and infiltrators are one of the state's most reliable and longest standing sources of information, sources of social disruption, and sources of repression and intimidation. We've had people being surveilled. We've had interactions with the police where it's very clear that they know who we are, that they are keeping files on us and recognize us by face. So there's definitely that kind of ever-present knowledge that we are being watched by the state.
During the week, it was really fucking stressful. One shitty thing was in the middle of it, what they decided to do to fuck with us was, instead of letting people out at the jail, they started driving people to random street corners in St. Paul and dropping them off, sometimes with no shoes, in the middle of the night. So we'd get these phone calls and be my friend just called me from a payphone and he's somewhere lost in downtown St. Paul with no shoes. He just got out of jail. What do we do? And trying to figure out how to help those people, how to find them, how to get their names. That was a really big challenge. One of the things that I've learned coming out of the experience of the last year of sort of RNC aftermath work is that just how fucking essential it is to have people doing that work, and also people with new energy. A lot of people spent 2 years before the RNC organizing and setting shit up, and then they all went to jail, and they don't have the energy to continue on getting to the court dates, coordinating the meetings, whatever. And it's having people prepared, like emotionally and politically, and having a community prepared for what it means to take care of people in the face of state repression. It's a really long, really draining process to keep coming to court every day and, I don't know, dealing with one thing after another. And so people who are, you know, dealing with multiple charges and trying to support other people and have 3 meetings a week and, you know, whatever, it's just like people, like, there's a point at which people need to take care of themselves. And I think trying to find ways that we can collectively support each other to, not to avoid burnout exactly, but to just like emotionally take care of each other in the same way that we're trying to legally take care of each other has been something that we've tried to be intentional around, because like people weren't sleeping, and that makes like, then they sort of get stressed out, and that makes working relationships more difficult. Well, when there would be calls from jail, mostly people were like wanting to know what was going on, wanting to make sure that we knew that they were in there. Like people had, because it's such a dehumanizing situation, and like you're so alienated, and so when you're in jail, and so calling out and like having a voice on the other end, and like somebody who you know is gonna like has your name down and knows you're there and is gonna know when you come out and like call if you disappear and whatever, I think that was really important for people. And then like people would call and be like, I saw someone get beat up, I saw, you know, there's someone here who hasn't eaten and or seems really unhealthy, or somebody who passed out or whatever. Like people were calling to tell us like who was most at risk, which was really important, because then we could call the jail and find out about what happened or what was going on with various people. At the jail, they would do shit like they would drive by, and then for the 1 block past the vigil, they would turn on their sirens in the middle of the night, and then like drive past the vigil, then turn off their sirens, go down another block, pull a U-turn, come back, turn on their sirens, drive past us. And just like that sort of like low-level harassment was pretty consistent. They like would come and like look at all our food. You know, at the time they were all paranoid about buckets, because they had this idea from, I guess, the raid at the Food Not Bombs house that like buckets were somehow weapons of terrorism, and they were like checking the oatmeal and like digging through the oatmeal, and I don't know. It was weird. If I was involved in this situation again, I think I would do more pre-planning and like making sure that that folks who wanted to do this work were emotionally taking care of themselves, so that we could be more effective in what we do, and so that people, I don't know, I guess wouldn't burn out. I hope that we can think about like, how are we effective? Like, at what cost did the RNC come to this community? Like, all these people came into town and like did their thing, and the police reacted really intensely, but then a lot of people leave, right? And there's a few people who are behind who are like trying to take care of the situation. And I hope that people think about like the impact that these types of organizational strategies have, not just on the activists and the people who are arrested and the people who are getting targeted for state repression, but also on like the people who stay here, and like what it actually means for, I don't know, for the people who live here. The St. Paul police got $50 million in federal funds to buy weapons for the RNC, to buy crowd control devices, and those crowd control devices haven't gone anywhere. They're just being turned against the low-income communities and the communities of color in St. Paul. The ways that St. Paul was militarized also like has this effect where it normalizes it. You know, like, oh, of course the cops have riot gear and tear gas and tasers and kill people, and you know, like once there's like that level of militarization in the city, like it sort of helps legitimize it or become more acceptable. Let's think about what happens when we come and like enact them for 4 days and then people leave, and like I want us to like be thinking more long term, and like what is the actual community repercussions of that. Like, I want to be part of like profound, revolutionary, like complete social transformation, and that's never what we're going to be if it's like, if we act like children. Like, I don't like the strategy of summit hopping. Like, I think it's not strategic to take on the state where they're the strongest and prepared for you. And like, nonetheless, if people want to do that, like, I'm gonna support them. I think one of the problems with legal support organizing is that it's been like a service model for a while, that like there are people who do it and then everyone else sort of accesses the infrastructures that like the legal workers set up. But like, I think one thing that Cold Snap really pushes, and that Midnight Special pushes too, is that like to empower people to do it themselves and to sort of demystify the law, so that people can take care of themselves and their own communities. And like, we're not lawyers, we're not experts, but within the radical community, we end up playing this weird role of like having more information than a lot of like average folks. And like, what we really want to do is like pass that information. From the volunteer list that we have has had about 100 people on it, and that would be people who did shifts at the jail, worked in the legal office, answering phones, people who were on the street team, like sort of cop watching, or people who were like running forms between the jail and the legal team, or I don't know, getting in touch with the National Lawyers Guild observers or whatever. There's no way we could have accomplished the amount of support, of direct support that we did without all of those volunteers. And so like, those volunteers are really the people who like did the work and got it done, and were there late nights and showed up. And like, I think the credit really goes to them and to like what ended up being a community response. Supporting each other in situations where people are being targeted for state repression is community self-defense, and it's absolutely essential that we take care of those of us who are most vulnerable, because if we let the state target the RNC 8 as terrorists, if we let them get 800 plea deals from the mass arrests, then like, they're not going to stop there. We absolutely need to fight them.
The court system is not capable, I don't think, of creating justice in the sense that people mean it when they talk about something other than the sort of sausage that we produce in the courthouse. Okay, people being treated fairly, people having access to the kinds of things that they need to survive, people being having the opportunity to be political actors, to be group actors, to be part of, you know, some kind of consensus building about what we want our future to be. None of those kinds of things can be created by the courts. I do not believe that social change is going to happen through the court system at all. It's just, I mean, it's not really that much different. I don't really consider myself much different than the guy than a plumber or a toilet mechanic. I mean, when the sewer's plugged, you call somebody out and they unplug it. That doesn't necessarily mean that the sewer is any better than it was before, whether it's the right way to do things. And what we do is we just go kind of unplug the sewer of the problems that arise from people living their life in ways that the government doesn't approve of. Bob Fletcher, who's the sheriff of Ramsey County, who's the guy who was the instigator behind the investigation of the RNC Welcoming Committee, and whose agency or office employs the cops who went undercover and who were doing the, you know, pulling all this stuff together for this investigation. He came out, his theory of the case is apparently that everything that happened during the RNC is a result of the organizing by the RNC Welcoming Committee, and therefore our clients are responsible for that, and that's what makes them guilty, what other people did. Really nothing has happened in that case for, I don't think we've been in court for 6 or 7 months. The government's been turning over piles and piles and piles of photographs and video. And the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, which is the agency who's prosecuting the felony level RNC offenses, has a compilation of stuff that they got online, video, that it's called the RNC disc, in fact, that you can get if you're an attorney representing anyone who's charged with any of these crimes. And what it is it's a compilation of video that someone from their office or someone from the sheriff's department or the police department or whatever has gathered up from on the internet. And so they're clearly using that somehow. I can tell you, I strongly suspect, and they've made statements that I think that would support this suspicion, that they're using whatever video they have available in order to identify people so that they can bring charges even today or tomorrow or the next day if they do identify someone like that. And they are, I know, frantically looking at all of this videotape from the internet. They're looking at the videotape from the CCTV cameras, the closed circuit stuff that the city of St. Paul put up. And they are identifying people, or trying to identify people who they say committed crimes or whatever. And they have charged people as recently as a couple of months ago. There's a statute of limitations. I believe the statute of limitations for most things that could be charged out of activities that went on during the RNC is about 3 years. One of the strategies that the Ramsey County Attorney's Office has used in some of the felony cases here, in fact they used it in Dave Mahoney's case, was if you're unwilling to plead guilty to what they've charged you with, we'll just keep adding charges on till it gets to be so unbearable and your exposure gets to be so great that fighting the case just becomes untenable. It just, charging someone with a crime does effectively silence them for a while. And certainly it does cause people economic damage in that they, maybe they have to pay for a lawyer or they have to, lose time from work. It causes them, it's like just living inconvenience, like if you have to travel or all those kinds of things. So it takes energy. Any individual who's charged with a crime, that process sucks energy from that person so that they're unable to participate in other things that they would want to participate in. We supposedly have the freedom of speech, the freedom to protest, the freedom to dissent, but the courts have permitted the government to impose restrictions on that. And one of the restrictions, or a combination of restrictions that's common and something that they had in the city of St. Paul, although I'm not sure about the number here, is that if you have 25 people or more, for example, and you want to go down to some corner and you want to protest some issue, you have to get a permit for that. And if you don't get a permit for it, then that's an unlawful assembly. What they do is they pass these ordinances restricting protest, really close to the beginning of these big events like the RNC. And so what that causes to happen is people who disagree with the constitutionality of those laws don't really have sufficient time to be able to get into court and adequately challenge those laws to get something in place that's actually passes constitutional muster before the event. And so and these governments know that. I mean, they know that if they can pass a law really quick and restrict people from doing this, that, and the other thing, and then maybe they can do some arrests, and even if those arrests turn out to be bad later, unlawful later, they don't really care that much because they just pay people off, and then they're able to have their little party. Lots and lots of people who did nothing wrong on any level were not safe in St. Paul, and the reason they weren't safe was because of the occupation that was organized beforehand by the St. Paul Police Department. A lot of the charges against journalists were dismissed. Some of the more independent journalists who were arrested maybe didn't get their charges dismissed because maybe their credentials didn't pass muster, or there's this kind of idea what does it mean to be a journalist now, right? I mean, lots of people are out there gathering information, doing blogs, and given any kind of a traditional sort of definition of what a journalist is, those people clearly are journalists. But I think that there's probably an effort to sort of restrict what that means so that they can say, well, these people we accept as journalists, and we're going to give them a certain amount of respect around these kind of activities. Other people, we're not going to do that to. I don't know that that's the case, but I suspect that that's where this will end up. It's not really journalists, but the medical people who were out on the street and who were helping the protesters who had been gassed and all that, they certainly were not immune from being arrested and being treated just like they were, you know, criminals or whatever. Even though very clearly, I mean, you can look at the video and you can see that a lot of these people were doing, these medical folks, was trying to help people when they were injured by the actions of the cops. So in a common sense world, or in a, you know, you'd look at that and say, well, at least somebody was willing to take care of these folks, because certainly the government didn't do anything to make sure that there was medical care available to the people who were harmed by the actions of these cops. The government, in preparation for these big events, the government will do whatever it takes to provide the kind of security they want for these kinds of events, regardless of what they tell you. So when they come out and say stuff like, we will not infiltrate groups who are organizing First Amendment activity before, you know, these kinds of events occur, they're lying to you, period. They're lying. They set out to provide security during these events with the idea that they are going to violate people's civil rights. So be it, we'll just pay to get out of it. And that explains why they take out these insurance policies. So they just buy an insurance policy that's supposed to cover people, you know, pay for their damages if they get hurt or if their violations get, or their civil rights get violated. And then the police just feel free to do that so that they can have this level of security that they want at whatever the cost is to individuals. The government, I think, will, there's a sense to me in which they will always find an excuse to be able to taunt groups of people or to harass groups of people or to make life difficult for groups of people who are banded together in opposition to their policies and stuff. So the police response to these kinds of things are more sophisticated than they look on the surface. So even though you see, and I mean more sophisticated, not just in the sense as to how they move around on the streets and they're able to corral people and stuff, they do think about who they're going to target, and they do think about doing intelligence to figure out who people are, and they do think about how people with particular viewpoints are going to be acting on the street and what they can do to sort of prevent those kinds of things. So some dude throwing a sign through a bank window, that's anarchy. That's all it is to the government. So, and they're able to sell that to the general public. So when these kind of events happen, those kinds of things, they say, oh, there's the anarchists. So then if you wanted to have a reasonable discussion about what it would look like to have a society built on consensus building and self-help and you know, fulfillment of individuals and working together in cooperatives and stuff like that, you're just not able to do it because they're able to give you this label as the person, as, well, oh yeah, you're one of the people who throws signs through the bank windows. Even though, you know, maybe that bank, for example, has engaged in business practices that have caused pain and, you know, maybe even death and, you know, and hardship to hundreds or thousands or millions of people. Breaking the window, they see that as anarchy or whatever, and then you never are able to get to the discussion of, well, this may be a better way of organizing ourselves into a political kind of, you know, whatever group, and this bank should be criticized for the kind of bullshit they're engaged in. So those, I mean, those are the kinds of thinking things that the government and the sort of corporate world is able to pull off to be able to marginalize people who are legitimate critics of the system.
The lawsuit is about the the policy that the city of St. Paul instituted prior to the RNC, whereby they decided that what they would do is they would isolate and contain potential protesters away from downtown and away from the Excel Energy Center where the convention was taking place. This particular event was an implementation of that policy, whereby the St. Paul Police Department herded people starting down around Jackson Street and Shepherd Road. I believe it might be turning into Warner Road right about that spot. They herded every single person who was in this area or on the sidewalks or in the park areas along Shepherd Road. They herded them all into this park, and then they arrested them even though they had no evidence that any of them had done anything wrong. In the course of being herded into this park, people were subjected to chemical weapons, flashbangs. We believe that there were also may have been some marking rounds fired, and of course there was the colored smoke, and then the oppressive number of riot-dressed police and also military attired police. A beautiful park like this, people are entitled to come here and gather and do things. Many people were doing just that. Lots of people were here in order to go to a concert that was going on across the river at Harriet Island, and if you look at any of the video of the events that happened here on September 1st of 2008, you can hear the music playing. And there's lots of people saying, oh, I would do anything to be able to go to this concert, but the police, of course, prohibited them from doing that, even though what was going on across the river was perfectly lawful and was permitted by the city of St. Paul. We also know that people are entitled to speak their minds, particularly when an event like a political convention is going on in town. There were people who here who would potentially have done that, people who wanted to do that, and people who had done that. Unfortunately, the message that they had was not the message that the city of St. Paul wanted to hear, and therefore those people were contained in this park away from the people who might hear that message, and then ultimately a lot of them were arrested. Some of them were held in jail for up to 72 hours. The RNC organizers prior to this event took out a $10 million insurance policy to indemnify the city and its employees against lawsuits for the actions that they would take during the course of the RNC. We believe that the fact that they bought that insurance company proves that they intended to violate people's civil rights in order to secure the city in the manner that they found to be acceptable. People were arrested. Well, the city admitted that people were arrested preemptively in this park. That is, they arrested them because they were afraid of what they might do in the future, which is a dangerous path for our government to take. Taken to its logical conclusion, what it means is that the government now believes that they can come to our houses and arrest us because they think that we might do something wrong. And our Constitution simply doesn't permit that. Civilized societies just don't do those kinds of things. Some people were just detained here for 3 hours or so. Some people were subjected to chemical weapons and detained. Some people were subjected to the smoke and just the oppressive power of the police. Some people were taken into custody and held and released a couple hours later. Some people were taken to jail and held for up to 72 hours. We have 27 named plaintiffs. Those are persons who will be representing the class of people we believe to number approximately 200. What happened is the event started up the road here a little bit, and what happened is the police came onto the scene. There were lots of people. Some people were protesting, other people were just taking a walk in the park, other people were on their way to the concert at Harriet Island. Some people were legal observers, some people were medics. So there was a whole array of activities that people were engaged in from here all the way down the street, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks or so. The police came on the scene, they formed a line, and what they did is they herded everybody into this park area. And everybody was peaceful. They were obeying the commands of the police officers. You can see it on the video. And even though they're clearly moving in the direction that the police want them to move, they continue to shoot tear gas and flashbangs and march with this line of police officers into the park down to my left. In the meantime, another bunch of police officers on bicycles, and I think some of them were also on foot, came into the park over here and formed a line that these people who were being herded from this direction could not pass. And in fact, they were told, don't approach the police officers, stay away from the police officers. You can hear the video. So the people were all herded into this area here, and then they went through the crowd and tried to find people they believed had been protesters, and they arrested those people and took them off scene. The rest of the people were here for about 3 hours, and eventually they were let go.
Was there ever a dispersal order?
There was no dispersal order. The city used what other people may have done in other parts of the city to justify what they did here, and what they did here was illegal.
I was a security guard for Avalon Security Corporation, and I was on my way to work at the XL Center. And I took this path to find a good route, and we were all arrested. I suppose you already know that story. What baffles me about the whole thing is that I was working for the man. I was supposed to be keeping protesters off the street, and I was arrested as one. And I was detained for 3 days. I was let out the morning of the 4th day, and as soon as I was let out, I was sent back up to the XL Energy Center, and I let Newt Gingrich into the convention.
Were you given an explanation why they had to detain you for 3 days? Is that?
No, in fact, I told the officer who arrested me that I was working security, and as he started to fill out his report, he looked at the officer next to him and said, "What did you put down for this? What did you put down for that?" on his paperwork. So I said to him, "Well, it's good to know that no matter how much schooling or training you go through, you can always cheat off of your neighbor." And he turned to me and said, "Well, do you want a felony riot? I can give you a felony riot." And he scratched out my charge and changed it to felony rioting. And I had that charge leveled against me, an unlawful assembly charge, and I didn't get my charges dropped for 6 months after this incident. I lost my position. I lost my full-time position at the place I was working security regularly at a Health Partners in Brooklyn Center, because when I was in jail, I couldn't show up for work the next day. So I lost my job because of this. It was, I would say, it was Kafkaesque.
I was arrested here on the way to the concert at Harriet Island. We entered the park on police instruction that this was the only way we'd be able to make it to the island. And upon getting here, realized that it was, in fact, there was no way to get to the island, where we were pretty much surrounded by riot cops and told we were under arrest with no warning to disperse. And I was held until that night. At about 11 o'clock, I was released and dropped off in a parking lot in St. Paul.
I am a daycare assistant from Muncie, Indiana, and I was in town for the RNC events. A year ago, as I walked down this sidewalk with a group of peaceful protesters, we had no idea at all of what awaited us a few blocks down Shepherd Road. We hadn't come to this park to fight police or cause property damage. We were here on these sidewalks, not in the street, to peacefully represent our views while walking down those said sidewalks. I was in this park, or near this park on the sidewalk, when the explosion started down the road and the flashbangs went off from the police attack on the protesters ahead. As I approached the area, I encountered dozens of people running from the explosions, many of them with eyes filled with tear gas. Others had burns and cuts from those concussion grenades. One man near me was hit directly in the leg, his lower calf, with such a concussion grenade, while he was administering first aid to someone with facial burns. Another man was hit in the back with one of these fabled marker rounds while he was fleeing. He was hit in his back left kidney. The police said nothing. There was no kind of orders issued to the crowd. Every officer was silent, and they pursued the group. The police continued to fire projectiles into the crowd as it was walking away, running away in some cases. When the assault was over and the tear gas had settled, there were hundreds of people surrounded in this park, in this area, in the grass, all along these sidewalks. Coast Guard in the river, not just the police on bikes and foot. I asked if we were being arrested, and the officer said that they didn't know. There was a line of police on bicycles with the St. Paul logo I approached them, asked if we were being arrested. The same officers that said they didn't know also told us that we were not allowed to leave. After a long wait there, police announced over megaphones that we were all under arrest. It was several minutes before they began taking people into custody, and the process was miserably slow. Everyone sat quietly in the sun for several hours as police arbitrarily pulled 2 people into custody at a time. When it was almost my turn, they had started selecting individuals from the crowd and searching them, and some of them were being released. My travel companion, who was documenting the event for the Independent Media Center, was arrested beside me and had his press pass pulled from his neck. I, however, was searched and released with nothing else said. I want to know where the restraint is in firing tear gas at a fleeing crowd. It's an ill-informed public who considers those actions to be civilized, let alone restrained. And I want to know who's accountable for these violent and tyrannical behavior of these officers. The test of whether one is living in a police state is that those who enforce the law are allowed to break the law with impunity. If we passively allow police to use less lethal weapons and mass arrest as instruments to quell public dissent, peaceful public dissent, then we help set a precedent, not just in this city, but all over the world and all over this country, of attacking first and rationalizing it afterwards.
I felt like I was being subjected to terrorism by the state, by police forces, and nobody seems to realize this. They're talking about what could happen, maybe in the future, but ignoring what is happening and what happened here 1 year ago today.
Definitely writing to folks who are incarcerated is really important, and letting them know that they haven't been forgotten.
Everybody that's engaged in political work should have a prisoner that they've adopted, or their collective should be doing work around somebody.
We developed a travel fund, and we're able to develop a hospitality board so we can help people find a place to stay, get them funds to get back and forth, and we're even able to fund witnesses if they want to bring a witness to trial.
Okay, protest is one thing, demonstrations are one thing, and I think people need to do them, and it's fine to go ahead and get permits and to get out there and do that and get massive amounts of people out there to do those kinds of things. I believe that more effective than that are direct action kinds of things.
The most inspiring thing for me is when I hear about organizers somewhere else adapting the St. Paul principles or something similar to the welcoming committees like Points of Unity, or other similar organizational models, and like moving forward with those. That to me doesn't help us a lick necessarily in our criminal case, but it just makes me feel like whatever happens to us, the work that we did is worth something.
What I hope that could come out of it is not that the RNC is like an isolated event unto itself, but that it's like the lessons that we've learned from this can be taken to other communities, and in particular like the strength of post-RNC solidarity can be created in other communities. And for me, if that's what comes out of the RNC, then I would consider that a success.
You've got to have a community to be able to fall back on and support you, and a community to be able to create the next, if the 8 of us go down, there's just going to be 8 more people to come up and take our place.
We need to be educated and able to provide the support that we need for ourselves, but also adapt so that we can handle things that come at us, like when they create a new weapon, or they do a new technique, or they try a new formation, or they try a new coordination of different state agencies or whatever it may be.
People who believe that we need fundamental change in the government need to engage the government in what really is a battle for the future of humanity. And so whether you get arrested, if you have to spend some time in jail, if it costs you some money, if it causes you some inconvenience, your children, your grandchildren, your future, it's all worth it. You need to continue the struggle, period.
I was really looking forward on September 1st of last year to going to the state fair. And I put it on my schedule to go to the state fair. And so this year I'm very excited to go to the state fair. And I hear that Susan Gartner is also going to be at the state fair. So
you have to if you want to run for governor.
Right, exactly. So, you know, if anyone wants to come join me at the state fair for a deep fried candy bar, I'll be there.